Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In the previous several videos, we looked at how to back up a database and how to restore a database. In this video, I want to take a little more deeper look into what's called the recovery state when you're restoring a database. So for our example, go to our database folders and right-click any folder. Go to Tasks, go to Restore, and then Database, and then click on the options. And the thing that I want to discuss is what's called the recovery state when you're trying to restore a database. As you'll notice, there are three, when I click down this, there are three recovery modes, or recovery state. One is restore with recovery, one is restore with no recovery, and one is restore with standby. So the two most common ones obviously are restore with recovery and no recovery. So let's discuss those in detail. So what does restore with recovery mean? Well, let's take an example first of a backing up of a database. Let's say you have a database and you've taken a full database backup only. At that point, let's say the database becomes corrupt, and now you're going to restore that database using only the full database backup. When you use only the full database backup and you use this option, restore with recovery, you're telling SQL Server that you're going to restore the database and you have no more other files to use. There are no more differential files to restore. There are no more transactional log files to restore. And then that you're only using the database, full database backup, and to make the database in a recovered mode. That's what you're saying to the database, to the SQL environment when you're using restore with recovery. Essentially, you're saying, I've recovered the database, I've restored the database, and there are no more files to add or restore. So now let's take a same example and extend it a little more. Now let's say you have a database and you've taken a full database backup and you've taken 3 transactional log backups. And let's assume now that database becomes corrupt and you need to restore the database. Well, how does the recovery state come in contact now when you have 3 separate files? Well, the first thing you're going to do, obviously, to restore a database, as you know, is you're going to use the full database backup. And when you use that, and when you have transactional log database logs to restore, you tell SQL you select restore with no recovery. So when you have the first full database backup and you're utilizing it to restore, you're going to leave this state into a no recovery state. Now, no recovery state tells SQL Server that you have more files coming that allow you to restore the database even further. As you can see here, it says additional transactional logs can be restored. So now that you've restored using the full database backup, you still have those 3 transactional logs to apply. So now you apply the first transactional log and you still leave the restore a recovery state in a no recovery, because again, you're telling the SQL Server, I have 2 more other transactional log files to restore. Then you'd use the second transactional log file and you leave that in a non-recovery mode also, because again, you're telling me I have 1 more file to restore. Now you get to your third and final, and that's the key thing. The keyword is final. Whichever number it is, when you reach the final of your transactional log, you have to change the recovery state to recovery. This will tell SQL Server that you utilized all the backup files and you're down to your last one, and now change and make the database in a recoverable mode. And I think it'll be a little easier now if I demonstrate that with T-SQL. So let's go move over there. So as you can see, I'm going to be using the backup database that I've been using. So the first thing I'm going to do is drop it using this, and I'm going to provide this for you. So there is no database if I refresh this. So the first thing I'm going to do is since we've discussed this several times, I'm going to be quickly creating a database, creating a products table, inserting 6 rows, and then I'm going to be taking a full database backup, followed by insertion of data, then followed by taking backup logs and backup differential logs and insertion of data. So this next 1 through 7 just emulates activity and backups and differential backups. So I'm just going to highlight this, and I'm going to be providing this script for you, so you can do this in one scoop. So now if I just execute, And if I go to databases and refresh, you'll see that I have a backup database. If I expand that, expand the tables, right click, you'll notice I have 13 rows. Oh, well, great. So far, so good. So now let's look inside that backup file that we took. So if I use this command, which I've provided for you, you'll notice that I have 5 rows or 8 rows. If I were to restore the database back up, and you know how to do this, I would choose number 1, position number 1, which is a full database backup. Then I would use the last transactional log, differential log, which is number 5, followed by any other transactional log, in this case, number 8. So it would be 1, 7, and 8. And if the database were to be corrupt right now, and I could use those files, I would restore the database with those 13 rows. But now let's emulate more activity. So a little more activity is going on, and I'm inserting 4 more rows. So now I have 17 rows, which I do. But as you'll notice now, at this point, I have not taken a transactional log backup. So at this point, if I were to restore the database using position 1, 7, and 8, I would only get 13 rows and not 17. Thus, I need to take what's called a tail log backup if possible. And now obviously I want to retrieve as much data and safeguard as much data as possible, and I want to be able to retrieve these 17 rows. So if there was any corruption here, I can restore it. So how do I do that? So before restoring the database, I need to what's called take a last tail log backup, if possible, with no recovery options. So again, I'm going to take a transactional log backup to cover these 4 inserts so I can retain them in my restore process. A couple of things to note. When you're taking a tail log backup, you must include 2 more things that were not part of the previous backup log file. And that is this option, with no truncate. And what that means is must have the no truncate option set so as to not to delete the remaining 4 inserts. So this is very important if we want to restore the database, including those 4 inserts. We must have the option no truncate, meaning we do not want the transactional log to clear. The other thing is we must also have the option called copy only. This way we do not interrupt or break the chain of sequential logs of the backup set with this backup. So now, and the other thing is make sure you're out of the database. So let's go select use master. I'm still highlighting here, so make sure you click off it. Now I'm going to take what's called a tail log backup. Basically, it's just a backup, another backup log before I restore the database using these 2 options. And if I execute this now, and now if I look at my database, let's see if maybe it's still in use. If it takes too long, this is a good example of demonstrating to you that something is wrong here. And I'll show you how to rectify that or correct that in a second. It's being used. So if you want to know what process is using, use this store procedure called sp_who. Execute. And if you go down, you'll see the database right here. SPID 54 is using that backup. So you want to kill that process. And the way you just do it is use kill whatever the SPID number is. In our case, is 54. So I want to kill that process. Now, if I run this again, you'll notice that I'll get a transactional log backup. So now that I've taken a transactional log backup of the last 4 inserts, I can view inside the file. And now you'll see that in order for me to restore the database now to capture those last 4 inserts, I not only have to do position 1, 7, and 8, I now need to do 1, 7, 8, and 9. This is the last tail log backup that I took. And that will give me the 17 rows rather than 13. So let's see that. One thing I want you to note is if I go here and refresh it, because I took a transactional log backup with no truncate, this is in what's called in a restoring state. in order to take it out of a restoring state, because it's no recovery. Remember, the no recovery puts it in a restoring state. So now I'm going to back up the database using the script. And again, this will be provided for you. So remember, I need to restore the full database backup, which is file 1. I need to do the last differential, which is file 7. And I need to do the last restore, including the very last one that I took, which was the tail, and that was position 9. And if I execute this, it'll just take a second. And now if I refresh the database, you'll see that the restoring state has disappeared. If I expand it, and now if everything works, I should have 17 rows as opposed to 13, which I do. So the database has been restored using the last tail log backup. So this is the illustration of how to use a tail log backup, and what are the options to use, primarily these two options when you're taking a transactional log backup. So this is and the recovery state, and these are the recovery states which I mentioned. So let me quickly repeat that just to illustrate. Remember, I said that if I were going to take a full database backup and there are other files to restore, then you must have the initial no recovery. And every file is in a state of no recovery until you get to the last one, which is recovery. In this case, recovery, and in this case, I don't have no recovery. So that's what I was illustrating by no recovery mode. And now it's a little more illustrative here. So I think I'll leave it here. I don't want to get too long, beyond 20 minutes or 15 minutes. So this is how to restore a database using a tail log backup to retain all the data as much as you can. So I'll leave it there and we'll continue with the next video. So this is Raphael with how to become a production SQL database administrator. See you in the next video.